What's up, everybody? Nathan here, and today I want to talk to you guys about Jeskai Geist and answer a question that some of you probably have. Is the deck good? I also want to talk you through how I updated a popular list. What we're looking at here is Jonathan Rossum's latest list that he top 8'd with at an SCG event. And I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the changes that I made to the deck and why. As some of you probably know, for the last 3-4 years, I don't know, the only deck I played in Modern pretty much is Jeskai Geist. I've had some, basic, nothing amazing, but I've had some competitive success with it, kind of just at the local level, and a little bit on Magic Online. But I most of my theory crafting in Magic and thinking about the deck is this deck. All right, so first off, it's not just is the deck good, but is it good, and why are more people playing it? So I think the first, is the deck good? I think that's just a basic yes. Does the deck have metas in which it's going to be better positioned? Obviously. I think every Modern deck is that way. But at the end of the day, Jeskai Geist is a collection of very powerful cards with a lot of synergy. And the deck has the ability to play both sides of a reactive and proactive game plan. And I think I've always thought that that's kind of where the power, I don't know if power is the right word, but the flexibility of the deck comes from, is the ability to pivot and to switch gears so effectively. I think simultaneously that can be one of the things that makes the deck a little bit more difficult to play. Whereas, like, if you go one extreme like Burn, it's just, not that Burn's easy to play, but you have a very focused game plan, and you really just need to focus on how to execute that. And if you're a pure control deck, kind of the same thing. You are trying to make the game go long, and ideally the longer the game goes, the more it should be in your favor. This deck is a little bit more difficult to pilot because you're trying to be reactive just to a point where you recognize that you can switch gears, leverage your life total to buy enough time to win the game. But one of the benefits that Jeskai has is that so much of its removal is also a win condition. And when you're playing a card like Geist of St. Traft, the Jeskai Shell is probably the best at minimizing his downsides and maximizing his upsides. You just get the most removal, and it's a deck in which you don't need to connect with Geist for every point of damage. And so, to the reason I think it's seen more popularity, I think the deck has improved some with the addition of Spell Queller. What it's done, you have to think of Spell Queller in some ways as a modal spell. It's a proactive threat as well as a reactive card. And it really sort of, your top end, like Cryptic Command, counter draw, tap team, attack with Geist plan, can be sort of bridged together with these Spell Quellers. You can Logic Knot into Queller into Cryptic Command. And Geist, Geist has the ability to sometimes run away with the game. He makes the burn plan a lot better because he does so much damage. And against some decks, he's just your best threat. When you back him up with Cryptic Commands, I have played a Geist and then chained a couple of Cryptics and won the game that way against decks that are flooding the board. And so the as far as, I guess I didn't really answer the question, why are people playing it now? I think the deck is improved with the addition of Spell Queller. I think more people are realizing that the deck is, here's the thing. I think a lot of people get stuck on, is this a tier 1 deck? Is this a tier 1 deck? But the decks that may not be exactly, tier 1 is less about a deck's power level and more about how good a deck is, and it's more about how much is a particular deck played at the moment. And of course that is related to power, but you can have very powerful decks such as a Mono Blue Tron, which has Mindslaver, arguably one of the most powerful effect in the game that you maybe don't see very much, and so they're not tiered. But I think when you take decks like Jeskai Geist, they're so close in power level to the top tier decks, and in some cases probably just as powerful is such a such a generic term that doesn't really apply. I shouldn't even use it. But the decks are good enough that when you face off against something like a reasonable matchup, obviously you have your bad matchups, but when you face off a reasonable tier 1 matchup, I think it really at that point comes down to pilot familiarity, pilot skill, and you don't need to worry so much like, oh, I'm playing this deck that's not quite good enough. I just don't think it's true. Especially if you look at how the deck performs in the hands of a really good pilot, somebody like Jonathan Rossum. He's got 2 back-to-back top 8s in 2 large Star City game events. I am not a Magic player of that caliber. That's not something I could do. But clearly, if you have that level of skill, it is shown that the deck can... the deck will be up to that level of performance. In the past, it's won a couple of GPs. It's kind of always been around in Modern. And if you want to dedicate yourself to a deck that can adapt to take on a lot of different threats, but also provide a lot of pleasing gameplay, I think it's really good. And then one thing I'll say otherwise why I think people have been playing it, if one of the top decks is Grixis, typically against those blue mirrors, Geist is really just a trump card. Geist is probably one of your best cards against that matchup. And so it was the same when it was Grixis Delver and even Grixis Twin. Geist is just a really great card in those matchups. And even in the matchups where he's not the greatest, like I said, he can make the burn plan better. Okay, so that's the first half, which is, do I think the deck is good? Yes. Why are people playing it? I talked about it. Okay, so let's talk about what I changed. What I want to do is kind of 2 things. I want to talk about by the way, if you're watching my current league, thank you very much. I'm going to build the list that you're going to see in that league, and then I'm going to make some improvements to it. And I was going to save this kind of for like Saturday or Sunday. That way I had a nice video to bridge over the weekend in between maybe a league next week, although I'm going to be traveling until Sunday in Croatia, and my flight gets at 11, so I probably won't have time to record a league before next week. But then I thought, you know what? Some people might have some FNMs or tournaments coming up this weekend, and maybe they want to play this deck, and they might appreciate seeing like an update on it. Okay, so this is Jonathan Rossum's list, and I've done an unlimited amount of deck techs at various point in times on the deck, so I'm not going to go into every single card, but I want to talk about what I changed from Jonathan's list and why. And I'll talk also what I liked about it. So the first thing that I really liked about it is the Disdainful Stroke. This is a card that had sort of fallen off my radar. So props to him for remembering it or testing and finding it, whatever he did. But for me, it was 3 Ceremonious Rejections, which actually seems really reasonable because they're really good against Eldrazi Tron, assuming they don't get an early Cavern. You can also they're great against Affinity, which is another top tier deck, and then not a ton of people play Lantern, but you can bring them in against that. You obviously bring them in against that, but then they're also going to be great against the Tron deck. Now, what's great about Disdainful Stroke is another top tier deck is like the Titan Shifts decks. So your 3rd Rejection obviously has no overlap with that deck, but when you switch it to a Disdainful Stroke, you still get to bring it in against Eldrazi Tron. You still get to bring it in against regular Tron. Now you have some overlap with another top tier deck, and you're okay to lose some of the percentage points by it not being a Ceremonious Rejection against Affinity because you already have a good Affinity matchup. And so I think it's better as a Disdainful Stroke. You can also bring it in against some of the blue decks, hit their Planeswalkers, hit their Cryptic Commands, and you can even bring it in against Gifts because Gifts Ungiven cost 4. Gifts are Storm, rather. So I think the card's actually totally reasonable, and I like it much more as a Disdainful Stroke over a Ceremonious Rejection because it just gives the deck, it gives it a bit more overlap. I like the one of Dispel. Personally, I'd like to find 2. I haven't found a way yet to do that on my list. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, the Relic of Progenitus, I am personally just more a fan of Surgical Extraction. I don't like hitting my own graveyard, and I feel like the graveyard decks that are outside of, say, the Shadow decks, which Relic's probably a little bit better against, Surgical Extraction is good enough because you can just pick apart their important cards. Like Dredge, you can pick apart Prized Amalgam. Storm, you can hit like their Grape Shots, or just I also like Surgical Extraction because you can really kind of surprise people by casting it for no mana. So for me, for now, I want these to be surgicals. I'm not convinced that I need the relics to make the Death Shadow matchup winnable. Now, maybe it improves it in percentage points, and maybe Jonathan has done more testing than me, and maybe they're critical. But where I'm at right now, I am going to run the surgical extractions until I can find time to do some testing and prove myself otherwise. Because I don't, even without, you can still bring these in against Death Shadow. You can hit their shadows. You can hit their Gurmag Anglers. They're not a very threat-dense deck. And if you take their shadows, then their Gurmags aren't nearly as scary. You have a lot of positive ways to interact with their creatures anyway. I think that the extractions are totally reasonable against that deck as well. Okay, so that's the first change I would make. The second is I don't know that the second Stony Silence is really necessary. It's nice for when you run into decks like Lantern, but against Affinity, our Affinity matchup's already pretty good. And it's, I think cards like Rejection and Stroke are better against Eldrazi Tron than Stony Silence. They have maps, but you're not really like crippling their entire deck like you are when you play this against Tron. And like I said, if the Affinity matchup's already good, then what do we really want the second Stony Silence for? I'm fine to just make some sideboard space because I don't necessarily think that we need to. Now, touching on the graveyard again, the Rest in Peace, I normally just don't ever run Rest in Peace. Usually I would run 3 surgicals before the Rest in Peace. I really hate shutting Snapcaster Mage off, but at the same time, I don't hate kind of having some of the white Silver Bullet cards, like the Stony Silence and the Rest in Peace. It's kind of nice to have like what some of the best white sideboard cards are, at least in one-ofs. So I'm fine to keep it for now. You might run into decks like Living End, and it's kind of nice to have this. If I play this on turn 2, their deck just does nothing card. Also, I think Celestial Purge is a great choice right now because of Death Shadow, Gurmag Anglers, Liliana of the Veils. And again, it's another just really versatile, really useful white sideboard card. Kind of the same with Wear Tear. There was one point in time in which I wouldn't have built a Jeskai Sideboard without a one of Engineered Explosives and a one of Wear Tear to start out. And I had sort of just moved away from it because maybe at one point in time, I was like, oh, I don't need it, and then other cards made it in, and it hadn't cycled back through. But it's just a nice catch-all. Sometimes you play against that guy who has the enchantment deck, and it's nice to be able to have some hate for that. It's reasonable to bring it against Affinity. It's just kind of nice to have as this is going to be a useful card. And it's nice against Ensnaring Bridge if you play against Lantern. Although it seems like I never play against Lantern, and then I play against it once, and it's super annoying. Okay, so some other changes. I'm fine with one Vendilion Click on the sideboard. In fact, I actually like it. Against decks like Storm, you actually probably want to board out some of your Geist, if not all your Geist, because tapping out is just a very scary proposition. But I don't really want it main. For me, it's been good against combo matchups. That's pretty much the only place I want it. Now let's talk about these 3 cards, and we've already cut a card. So let me talk about these sweepers. I don't want them, because I think that in this shell, Dusk Dawn is the future. At least as long as we're in a Eldrazi-dominated meta. I just don't think people have really, I don't know if Jonathan Rossum has tested it. I don't know why the people that are playing this deck aren't playing this card. When I saw I think it's Retribution of the Meek. It's like 2 white and a colorless, destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater, but it's a legacy-only card. I always thought, man, that's what we really need in Jeskai Geist. I wish we had that. That would be so great, because then we could, this was like during Abzan. We could play our Geist, and then when they played 2 Tarmogoyfs, we can just waste their Tarmogoyfs. And so when I saw this, I was like, this is exactly what this deck wants. And then once I started playing with Queller, it wanted it even more. It doesn't kill any of your creatures. It's a one-sided Wrath. Against the deck that you want a Wraths against for big creatures, namely Eldrazi, this is exactly what you want. You want to still be able to play your Quellers and play your Geists and then mop everything up and have it be a one-sided Wrath. You can also bring it in against GBX decks, and it has late-game potential with the Dawn half of Dusk. There have been times when I have, at least with this deck, it's hard to sort of make a decision on what's best, and I have struggled to take a strong position on cards, because I guess I kind of maybe question my own maybe I lack a little confidence to make like strong decisions. Just because I feel like I'm not as an experienced deck builder, and I don't have the results of, say, like Jonathan Rossum. But I will just say that, like, standing by like my own logic, I do not understand how this card is anything other than amazing in this meta against Eldrazi. You can also bring it in against Death Shadow. Of course, they can counter it, but sweepers aren't going to be your main game plan against that deck anyway. Your main game plan against them is going to be Geist, Burn, and Path. That's how you're going to win that game. You might win it with Quellers too, but this is just like a nice plan B. And what's interesting, this has happened to me on more than one occasion. There are times in which you play Geist, and they're like, man, he played a Geist. I can't F with that card. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to delve away. I'm going to play a Gurmag, and I'm going to pay my last mana, and I'm going to play a Death Shadow, and I'm just putting both threats out there, and he's going to have to deal with both of them, and if he can't, then he can't attack with his Geist, and so they'll kind of like tap out and flood the board, and then you just can Dusk, and it's ridiculous. Okay, so I think I talked about this. I'll just say it again. In this shell, when you only have two power creatures, in a deck in which you need to punch Geist through big creatures, Dusk is exactly what we want, and I think if this deck continues to remain popular and good players keep playing it, eventually you will see them playing this card, because I just think it's exactly... I've been playing this deck for so long, I've wanted a card like this for so long. Anyway, I think I've said enough about it. Okay, last couple of things. If we're going to have these Dust-Ons, I don't think we need Elspeth Sun's Champion. So that actually gives us 2 sideboard slots to work with. For me, I love playing as a Staticaster. I think this card is amazing. Merfolk just got a new card, which would make you pay 2 to do this, to use this. I'm not going to talk about that now, but I'll say, like, against Merfolk, you can hit Cure the Great Glass Spinner and then shoot her. You can clear up all of their little... So I think it's Silvergill Adepts. It's great against Elves. It's great against Affinity. It's just good against so many decks with small creatures. You're already good against small creatures, so I don't want to devote too much space to that. But this just sort of like, it's kind of like one of those Silver Bullet cards a lot. It's like if you play this against a deck with small creatures, it's kind of like playing a Rest in Peace against Living End. And then for the last card, which is kind of like the Elspeth replacement, I really haven't decided what it could be. If I just had to pick something, I would want it to be Thundermaw Hellkite, because I just like playing with Thundermaw Hellkite. It's not completely unreasonable for you to pick something like Sphinx's Revelation, because there are times in which you're more of a control deck, and it's nice to have like a payoff card. But this is what I've been running it as. I've been playing it as a Ruined Halo. I don't know how amazing this card really is, but the real reason is I feel like I want something else to bring in against the Valakut decks. If you have Geist encounters, then the Valakut matchup I think is pretty much in your favor, especially if you're on the play. But you have hands in which you have like a Snapcaster Mage, a Serum Vision, the Logic Knot, a Cryptic, and some lands, and you have to keep it. But what ends up happening is if you don't draw into your Geist, you don't have the ability to kill them quickly, and eventually they get Valakut online, and they will not only kill your creatures, but they'll eventually kill you with it. And so maybe it's not the right way to go, because now you're talking, well, I need to get Ruined Halo and a Geist. But this means that if you play this, you also don't really need to worry about countering some of their stuff. I mean, you still want to counter it, but it protects you from Valakut, and then they can't kill your threat with their Valakut triggers. And if you have this and this in play and you can counter their other threats, you're definitely going to win the game. And it's not completely unreasonable. You can bring it in against anything with big scary threats. You could bring it in against Death Shadow and name Death Shadow. You could bring it in against Eldrazi and name Reality Smasher. So that's what I'm running for now. I don't have a better idea. Okay, so this is the list that I've been playing. Now some improvements that I want to make to it. These Spire Bluff Canals need to get out of here, and in this list they need to be Glacial Fortresses. If you're watching my league, then you're going to see there's at least once, maybe twice, where I didn't have enough white mana to cast the Dust-Ons, but I'm also having this Ruined Halo. I need the additional white sources. Without the Glacial Fortresses, if I do the math, there's exactly 16 white sources, but according to Frank Karsten, like the god of probabilities and mana and magic, you basically need to have 18 sources to reliably have 2 white sources on turn 4. And I believe now with the Glacial Fortresses we have 18. And also, I think that I've been running the Spire Bluffs for a while. I think they're great. But I feel like I have these annoying times when, my land comes into play tapped and I don't have Cryptic, or my land comes into play tapped and I don't have Colonnade, and that's always going to happen. But I feel like the check lands might be better in this list. I mean, the Spire Bluffs are good too, and I have these moments where I'm realizing I can sequence things in a way to play the Spire Bluffs, and they're good. But the thing is, like, after turn 1, your check lands probably come into play untapped also. So and there are times in which you have Colonnade and like a check land and it's super annoying, but a lot of times you have a Colonnade into a fetch into a check land and it doesn't matter. So I kind of think check lands might just be better. The other thing so something I tried recently I want to share with you guys is I tried some Restoration Angels and I just didn't really feel that impressed. I really like this card, and the reason I tried it is because there are times when I'm playing this deck where I'm like, I have a Cryptic in hand, and I'm like, man, I wish this was something to kill them instead of to sit on this Cryptic. And I got some nice usage out of Restoration Angel. I played against some Humans deck, and I was able to flash it in and block, but for the most part, it just didn't seem like it just didn't impress me. I also played against the Death Shadows deck, and they killed it, and Restoration Angels doesn't really match up very well to a 5/5 or a Death Shadow. I also sort of felt like, people are like paying 4 mana and getting on turn 2 or 3 and getting Reality Smasher. Kind of made not Reality Smasher, Thought Knot Seer made my Restoration Angel not feel super powerful. And then if you look at like they're playing a 13/13 for 1 mana, or even a 5/5 for 1 mana with Gurmag Angler, it kind of makes Restoration Angel just seem like not as good as those things. That doesn't mean that you couldn't run it, because it's still a good card, but I don't know that it's what the deck is necessarily looking for. What I had tried was this. I trimmed a Cryptic, I trimmed an Electrolyze, so I gave myself some more action. I'm fully aware of the role that Electrolyze plays in the deck, but at the same time, you sometimes get hands in which you have like 3 Electrolyzes, or you have like 1 or 2 in the opener, and it can be a little clunky. Now, I mean, obviously I like casting at the end of turn, snapping it back at the end of turn. One card I was playing before people were at the 3 Logic Knots was actually Remand. I don't know if I have any video. I don't think I have any video. Maybe I have some videos with that list, or maybe I have it in one of my published 5.0 results. I really can't remember. Yeah, I just checked. I mean, this is all the way back in January, but obviously, and this is a different list. But, I had the Logic Knots and then the Gate, and I had the one of Remand there. I like the idea of it being something that cantrip still. I don't know how good Remand really is right now, but I'm just kind of like looking for something that's a little less clunky than Electrolyze. And for me, and maybe this is arbitrary, but I would like to have 4 2-mana counters. And personally, maybe this is just me just wanting like some kind of, like parity. I kind of like the idea of having 4 Cryptic Commands and 4 2-mana counters, and then 4 Spell Quellers. Like, you have these nice 12 pieces of interaction. Maybe I'll try this, or maybe I'll try this. Like I said, I just didn't feel that impressed with Restoration Angel, but I don't want to be too results oriented, right? Because on paper, I like the way Restoration Angel interacts with the deck. It was actually one of your best long game cards in the old versions too, by blinking Snapcaster Mage and buying back removal or counter spells. But I don't know. If I had to play a tournament this weekend, I would do some more thinking, and I'd probably either play this, which is, again, my thinking is that 4th Cryptic that I sometimes draw in the game that I wish was a threat. It would be to make it a threat, so I'd consider doing this. Or I would just stay committed to the 4 Cryptic plan of the deck. I don't know yet. Curious to hear what you guys think. Maybe you can try it. Let me know how it works out. As far as the sideboard, I wouldn't change anything thus far. I would make those Glacial Fortresses. That pretty much covers it. I think I would start with this core. And I may go back to the 3rd Electrolyze. It just depends. But this looks good to me. All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I was going to try to keep it under 15 minutes. I don't see a timer, but I have a funny feeling that the first part of the video went at a reasonable pace, and then the second part sort of dragged on. But, it's a deck I've just played so much, and I always have more to say about it than I think I do. Oh, one last thing, and I tested this yesterday, and it was fine. Is potentially just only one Glacial Fortress and running the Iganjo Castle. Let me count up these blue sources really quick. Mathematically, I think this should be fine. We have 20 natural blue sources, and each Serum Visions, so each cantrip typically counts as 0.25 of a land, but because you get the Scry with Serum Visions, it counts. I checked with Frank Carson on Twitter. I think each one's 0.45. So if you say we have, what did I say, 20? I don't want to make you guys watch me count, but that's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Yeah, that's 20 natural blue sources. You need 22 in a Cryptic Command deck. You can have an additional 1.8, so now we're at 21.8. And if you're willing to count this Remand as a cantrip, which I am, because it's at 2 mana, so it's on the way to getting to 4, then that's an additional 0.25, so you're at 22.05 or something. Basically, you have your 22 blue sources, even if this isn't a blue source. And it also, this goes to the 18 requirement white sources. So I'm going to try this, actually. I'm going to try keeping it as an Iganjo Castle. I just have always loved the way that it interacts with Geist of St. Traft. Obviously, your mana will be slightly better with Glacial Fortress, and there might be a time in which you have this and can't cast Cryptic Command, but mathematically, it should be fine. Okay, that's it. I'm out of here. Leaving in a few hours for Croatia. Looking forward to spending time with my family. My parents are here, my daughter, my wife, my son. Should be a great weekend. Gonna do a little bit of photography. And if you have a Magic tournament coming up this weekend, I hope that you do well at it. Enjoy. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.